Conscience non confinée, which is organized by Convergence des luttes des Sud in collaboration with alternatives. And these conversations attempt to highlight the risks as well as the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic on various movements and struggles around the global South. So I would like to invite you to like and share the video and tag your friends as well. And if you wish to stay informed about upcoming conferences and discussions, you could also subscribe to our page. Today, after having addressed the situation in Latin America, we've addressed the situation previously in the Maghreb and the Caribbean in face of this pandemic. Our sixth conference today will focus on the Middle East, where we're pleased today to have incredible panelists here on our side. We have Mohamed Ramadan from Egypt, Rami J from Palestine, Laith Marouf from Syria, and Salman Khairallah from Iraq. And I will be introducing them much further as we start. So to start, we will hear from our guests who will share each a 5-minute presentation, giving us an overview of the situation in their country and the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then afterwards, our speakers will take turns to answer some questions that I have for them. And then I'll share some of the questions as well. So if you wish to participate and you have any questions that you would like to ask our panelists in terms of the context in each countries or generally, you could leave your comment down below in the live, and then we'll pose the questions later on at the second part of our discussion. So let's get started. So I would like to introduce the first panelist today, and also ask him a question about the general overview in the situation in his country. So we have Laith Marouf with us today from Syria. Laith is an award-winning multimedia producer and media policy and law consultant. His media work spans issues of liberation and decolonization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples. While his policy consultancy work is concentrated on building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented and underrepresented communities all over the world. So Laith, welcome with us today. And I would just ask you to give us a global picture or an overview of the situation right now in Syria, and also the crisis management of this pandemic in terms of the political decisions and the government approach.
So I would like to thank you very much for having me here, and send my salutes to all the participants and those who are watching today. I am currently in Beirut, Lebanon, where I've been residing for the past almost 2 years, since moving out of Canada, where I lived for 25 years. And the situation in Lebanon and in Syria is in terms of the how many people have contracted the COVID is very low in comparison to many other regions in the world. The numbers of official announced cases are just in the hundreds, here in Lebanon and also in Syria. And the numbers of deaths is very low, thankfully, in just the tens. So, part of this situation, specifically in Syria, why in the regions under the Syrian government control, why Corona hasn't spread like in places like in the West, in the United States or Canada, is partially because of the war and the sanctions, which means there wasn't many international travelers coming into Syria as a country, which meant the transfer was very low. Much of the cases that are undetected right now and where people are worried in the situation in Syria are in the areas under either the Wahhabi Contra control in Idlib and or the Turkish zones, occupied zones, and the zones under the occupation of the United States, where there's a lot of movement in and out of Syria by these forces. that is not checked, and there hasn't been any effort to actually regulate the curfews and or pandemic control mechanisms. In Lebanon, it was one of the first countries in the world to institute a lockdown for travel from outside, partially because Lebanon is very fractured and, around ethnic and religious lines. So every leadership of different ethnicities started accusing the travelers of the other of bringing corona. So this kind of racism within the Lebanese society rushed the Lebanese government to close down very fast. So no different sects accused the others of bringing it with them from their travels to different religious sites, whether it's the Vatican or in Italy and or Iran, the Shia sites. So it's one of the few times that racism actually brought a good effect in Lebanese politics. So the shutdown happened very fast. And so this is in general the health situation for Corona in Lebanon and Syria. We're just finishing right now the major lockdowns in Lebanon, and that's like, almost 10 weeks of lockdown that happened, and they're beginning to open some of the businesses. In Syria, the lockdown was instituted for a few weeks, but because of the low cases, the government has been lifting most of them. But again, schooling for both in Lebanon and Syria has been all canceled in situations that are official schooling, and students were given passes, except for the final 12th grade baccalaureate. And universities, even here in Lebanon, gave a choice to students of pass or fail instead of grading, to help with the stresses that are there for Corona. That's a major overview. I hope it's enough information.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Laith, for that input. So now we'll actually pose the same question to Salman, who's in Iraq. Salman Khairallah is an environmental human rights defender. He's a member of the Iraqi Social Forum and works on water pollution issues in Iraq. He also contributes to the campaign Protect Tigris, which works on minimizing the pollution in the Tigris River. Salman al-Mansouri regularly participates in the anti-corruption demonstrations, which started early October 2019. So Salman, would you like me to repeat the question again?
No, thank you, Vaha. Thank you so much. Thank
Perfect.
you. Thank you so much for you. Thank you for the participant. My greeting for the to the attendees, and for the people who seeing us now in this time. Now is night here in Iraq, so good evening for everyone. Actually here in Iraq, we have a bigger problem with COVID-19. Is related with many ways. So I will start from how was the start? The COVID-19, the coronavirus, how was it start, and when the Iraqi government start to be careful with this virus. Is in the end of last February, the Iraq government start to be careful with this virus, with this crisis, and start to build a steering committee, and this steering committee is leading by the Ministry of Health and Environment. So everything was from the last government and last prime minister, because as you know, the last 2 weeks or last month, we have in the beginning of this month we have a new prime minister and we have a new ministries also. So everything is changed. When we change the government, we change also all the laws, we change also all the and the decisions also. All of that is changed because of the government. This is the first thing. The second thing, we have when it start, all the people is be careful and get this news as risky, as a serious things. So it's a start with the quarantino, and we got the quarantino for 1 month or more than 1 month. So everything was good till the new government is coming and make a new decision about the quarantino, about and about the lockdown also. So now we have a new numbers of cases. Last 2 days we reach the 6,000. So this is not good for the Iraqi population, because as you know we have we will speak about all these points inside our question today, because we have a few points to focusing on it, because in all our cities we have an area for the poor families. So this is what should we focus on it, and how we can help them in the future and the next days, because it's super dangerous for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salman, for the overview. Would also now get a general overview of the situation in Egypt, and for that we have Mohamed Ramadan here with us today. Mohamed is an economic researcher focusing on inequalities in the MENA region. He works on the effects of neoliberal policies on different economic sectors and the intersections between poverty and demographics in modern Egypt. So Mohamed, welcome today, and we'd like to hear a general overview of the situation in terms of COVID in Egypt.
Welcome to you and to other participants in this panel. My greetings to our viewers here. I would like to start by addressing the current COVID pandemic in Egypt, the current context of the COVID pandemic in Egypt. If you look at the numbers, you will see that we have around 23,000 cases. We have around 900 deaths so far. Numbers doesn't give you anything about the current status quo of COVID-19 pandemic in Egypt. If you look at the number, you think it's very low numbers, as Egypt is a huge country. It's more about 100 million people. So it was expected to be affected more by the COVID-19 pandemic, especially as the declining of healthcare system here in Egypt. But you will know that these numbers are not the right number for infections here in Egypt or cases, because the government does not expand the testing capacity of their by testing kits, by PCR examinations. There are difficulty to access this testing here in Egypt. A week ago, it was being bought by a private hospital, so it's like neutralizing the tests in the current global pandemic. We have difficulties related to the current status of the healthcare system in Egypt, which was suffering even before the pandemic. The system now is overwhelmed with cases. Even that cases is not the real cases, but there are many cases that when they get the coronavirus, they have died before they reach the hospital, because hospitals are overwhelmed. We are in the middle of the climax of the pandemic now in Egypt. We are recording now more than 1,500 cases a day. In a country like Egypt, with the intersections of poverty, the demographics, the population density, it's like a rare crisis right now here in Egypt. We hope we get through it. The government policies were not as it was expected here. We were expecting more commitment to applying PCR testing, but even after the popular popular demands for that on the social media, from experts related to government and from independent experts and independent health experts, the government still doesn't expand the testing capacity, which is the main problem here in Egypt. We didn't go in a lockdown. We locked down the service sector only, the industrial sectors, housing sectors, construction, every other sector, the agriculture sector is still working full capacity. So in an open economy like that, we need testing, but the government doesn't have the capacity of testing. And later this week or the last 2 weeks, we witnessed a private sector in healthcare coming to the scene and performing testing with higher prices, about $1,000 a day for staying in a private hospital to get treated or to get tested. Test alone is cost more than $500. These numbers are above all the capacity of about 90% or 95% of the Egyptian people. So that is the general context. We are in the middle of a crisis. We hope to get through it.
Thank you, Mohamed, for this input. And now, last but definitely not least, we'd like to hear the situation in Palestine. And for that, we have Rami J. Rami, a human rights activist from Jerusalem, holding a master's degree in democracy and human rights, and directing the Jerusalem branch of JLAC, which is Jerusalem Legal Aid and Human Rights Center, since 2008. Mr. Saleh collaborates with different organizations in East Jerusalem and West Bank. He's a member at the board of directors of the Palestinian Counseling Center, known as PCC, as the treasurer. Rami, welcome to the conversation, and please give us a general overview of the situation in Palestine.
Masa khair, good evening everybody, and thank you for having us here this evening in order to introduce the situation in Palestine. Unfortunately, when we're talking about Palestine, since I'm living in Jerusalem, it's a very unique situation. Why? Because when we are talking about Jerusalem, me as a Palestinian living in Jerusalem, there is the occupation authorities, the Israel occupation authorities, that should be responsible for providing the health care for us as Palestinians. We're talking about 324,000 Palestinians who are living within the Jerusalem Light municipality, and we have the rest of Palestinians who are living in West Bank, that they have a government, and also we have the other one, which also is the Palestinian one. This is very important.
Rami, can you hear me? I think we lost you. Rami? Your screen is frozen and we can't hear anything. Rami, if you can hear me, maybe you can get out of the call and then call back again. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Okay. Okay, we're just going to give it a couple of minutes until Rami gets back on the call.
Maybe we can move along and
Yeah.
he can answer 2 questions on the next step
Yeah.
when he gets
Yeah.
back on.
Yeah, that may be better. So let's move on to the second. I have a very important question again in terms of repression and measures that were taken. And I know that some of you have lightly mentioned this earlier. So the question here is the population following the measures that are sort of given out by the government? And if not, were there repression against them? Or were repressive measures taken, especially in terms of laws or bylaws or regulations? And maybe we can start with Salman. Can we start with you?
Yes, of course. Yeah, about this regarding your question is there is a few points I want to mention it also gathering with this answer, because here in Iraq many of the population in the fair in the middle of March, because the quarantine and the lockdown start in the middle of March here in Iraq. So they are just like what I mentioned. They took this crisis as a serious. So all of them go to the house and no one go out. And with this issue, we don't have that much of the of the worker who's have money. So as you know, we have many of workers is daily workers, so they need the money. So and we already have a big gap with the economic system here in Iraq, because as you know, we depended on oil, and actually the oil from last April it's down, is in $25 for 1 barrel. So this is super racist for us now, and with the time is making bigger. From the last month till now, from the middle of Ramadan till now, from the middle of May till now, this is a huge problem. We have it now. Many of people go to the street. Many of people that they didn't care about anything of the absolutely who's the areas and the cities for the poor families. They didn't care about anything. They said we don't have anything to leave it, so we will die with coronavirus or without coronavirus. This is what they said exactly, and this is a huge crisis for them, absolutely. And also, I want to mention something related with that. The Iraqi government they work to solving this point, but as you know, they didn't have those tools how to solve it, because as you know, from we don't have anything to change, you know. And we will mention something about the revolution and what happened from from the beginning of October 2019. Why the revolution is coming, because there is a huge corruption from the 17 years ago, and before this 17 years ago, we have corruption, and we have the dictatorate Saddam Hussein. So we don't have anything to do it. So that's why all the people, they said we don't have anything to do it, and all the rich families and a few peoples, they said no, they are stupid and they didn't listen. No, they cannot listen for this crisis, and they cannot listen for the government, and what the decision came from the government, because they don't have anything to do it. They don't have food for their family, because they independent families. That's why they didn't care about the crisis in the last month till now.
Yeah. Thank you, Salman. We have Rami back here. Rami, welcome back. I would just also like to, maybe you can address these 2 points together. So a general overview of the situation as you started to talk about, and then following that, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about the population in terms of following the measures that were given out, and also if there was a repression against people when they're not following these measures?
Yes, yes. So back to that, we were talking about that we have three different, let us, status for us as Palestinians. We have the two governments, one in Gaza and one in the West Bank, and we have the status of Jerusalem. So that back to the situation and how the corona started, it was back in Bethlehem. You know, Bethlehem city is a touristical city. And at the beginning, we were talking about 19 people that were infected from tourists, a Korean group that was there, and it was starting to spread out. One of the wise, let us say, a wise decision of the Palestinian Authority, the government in Ramallah, they said that they are going to lock down Bethlehem city, actually govern it. Then they started spreading it out, and then they announced the state of emergency. Usually, we as a civil society, we do not go parallel with the state of emergency, but at this time, and for the situation in Palestine, because just to let you know, we are not talking about a fragile healthcare system. We don't have a proper healthcare system, so that it was a very wise decision by the authority to stop and to close all of, to make a lockdown, and we were beginning from the first countries. And this was the first wave. The first wave was in Bethlehem, and after 2-3 weeks, we have noticed that workers coming back from Palestine 1948, actually working workers that they were been in Israel, they came back to the northern governorates in Nablus, Salfit. They start also having the coronavirus, and it started there. So that this is the situation in the West Bank, and in Gaza it started also that by some Palestinians who came back to Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip is under siege. Palestinians are not able to go from there easily, so that it started there very, very lately, but we had some cases there. Just to let you know, they are talking about the current situation. We are having only 80 active cases in the West Bank, according to the Palestinian Ministry or Health Ministry, but the total was 450 Palestinians. What is the situation in Jerusalem? Jerusalem as a city, it's unoccupied, so that, as I have mentioned, that it is the responsibility of the occupier to provide the healthcare system. Unfortunately, and as it was expected from the Israeli authorities, they haven't provided any proper healthcare system to us as Palestinians living in the city of Jerusalem. And we were, just to let you know, that as civil society, the Palestinian Authority itself was not able to come and work inside the city of Jerusalem, so that we were left alone as a civil society. And we have established what is called the Jerusalemite Assembly Against Coronavirus. It is a totally civil society organization, 82 organization network that we gathered and worked together in order to provide awareness for Palestinians. Just to let you know, the Israeli authorities at the beginning of the epidemic inside Jerusalem, as we were starting, like putting posters for Palestinians, for Jerusalemite to be aware, the Israeli authorities arrested the people who were working on this. Palestinians, we as assembly, we started working on cleaning and this taqim, cleaning the streets in the city, in the old city. The Israeli authorities came and arrested those volunteers. Why? Because they considered us as Palestinians, that we are having a kind of a relation with the Palestinian Authority, and we are totally independent. We don't have any direct relation with them. They said, okay, because of that, the authority is for the Israeli, they have arrested those. So that it was really, really very difficult for us to be working against the coronavirus, and especially with the Israeli authority. Just before I turn to an important issue, just to let you know that the Israeli authority started working on providing or making the tests for Israelis. And they have different stations in order to make those tests. And it is important to keep in mind that the Palestinian neighborhoods inside Jerusalem, they were neglected. Until a Palestinian legal aid organization that submitted a petition to the Israeli Supreme Court obliging them to do so. And they were like, okay, we are going to make the test for Palestinian Jerusalem. So that this kind of discrimination within the Israeli system, we have noticed that since we are working and we are living in Jerusalem, we work in different, revoking residency rights, house demolition, and at the epidemic, it started and reached the healthcare system against us as Palestinians.
Thank you so much, Rami. Now we'd like to maybe give the chance to Laith to let us know about the population in terms of following measures and also in terms of government repressions.
In Lebanon, people were very serious, took the recommendations of the government to go under lockdown and not to go to public spaces except for important serious reasons. And you know, for up until this beginning of this week that we're ending now, it was very rare to see people out on the streets. Although Lebanon is going through a huge financial crisis that is instigated by the international pressure of sanctions on the resistance here, the people actually obliged and followed, and a lot of the religious and the political party structures became very active and started distributing food and others. This is an economy here in Lebanon that is dependent on tourism and services. It already was damaged with the 6 months almost of demonstrations that happened before the Corona crisis hit. There was already in December, and New Year times when a lot of tourists come to Beirut, the capacity in hotels was at 10%. So comes Corona, and of course, it's kind of a nail in the coffin to the economy. So two things I think save people from starvation, let's say in regions like Syria or Palestine or Lebanon, or even Iraq, maybe less so in Egypt because of the size of Egypt as a population. But two things that save people from starvation under these conditions of unemployment is, number one, people in the greater Syria region are kind of used to and normalized to them the constant war and chaos and economic hardships. It's 30 years of this at least in the region, for Lebanon, or 75 years, and somewhat in Palestine, and now it's 10 years in Syria of complete war. So, it's not something that, like looking at how people in the West are having a shock because suddenly there's huge numbers of unemployment or a chaotic situation. And the other is that the weather is good enough for people to grow their own foods, and there's a huge social network of support that, everybody in Lebanon knows that there is no state, there is no government since 1975, basically, since the civil war, or even from before that. Similarly in Palestine, people know, the Israeli government is going to do its worst to Palestinians at any time, and the Palestinian authority should be actually called the Palestinian non-authority. It doesn't control anything. So at least here in Lebanon, we haven't seen yet any situation of starvation or hunger. And similarly in Syria, the economy in Syria was already damaged. There's no exports to anywhere in the world. And people are surviving on on these social networks and religious charity and family support. And so it didn't really change yet. We haven't seen the full effect of it, and how much, would it actually have any as a lasting effect on the society yet. And there hasn't been any repression, just to answer, because I'm sorry, we haven't seen any repression in Lebanon or Syria for people who, let's say, decided to break the curfew. Those stories are very rare, and I don't think they would be, we see how people in the West have been having a freak out about civil liberties loss under pandemic government policies. Well, what civil liberties are we talking about? It's not like people lost anything here with the pandemic of that in our region.
Thank you, Laith. Let's also now hear the similar situation, similar question in terms of government repressions for Egypt. Mohamed?
Okay, so as I mentioned before, we didn't have a full lockdown here in Egypt. So the economy is still, in the most part, still working. Industrial industries are still working. Construction sector is still working. Agriculture sector is still working. This is mainly to the decision by the government to not conduct a lockdown, as it has been pressured by businessmen, by lobbyists in the parliament, and the other and the military elites that rule right now in Egypt didn't have a big problem with containing economic activity. So we have here in Egypt about 6 weeks ago or 7 weeks ago, we started a curfew, a 12-hour curfew. Maybe the government thinks that the virus didn't go out in the daylight. I don't know what's supposed to be there yet. Okay, in the curfew, there have been cases for the arresting of people who go out in the curfew, but later they were laid out of police stations. But here in Egypt, there is a campaign to oppress the critic, the one who criticize government on Facebook pages, criticize the plan of the government to deal with Corona or COVID-19 pandemic. There have been about 7 or 8 cases of activists, of researchers, of journalists that have been caught because they criticizes the government plan to COVID. We have about 4 or 5 cases of arresting doctors when they complain about the lack of about the lack of substances in the hospitals, and medicines, which is really vital for combating against COVID pandemic. We have a populist, what you can call a populist discourse against the doctor. In the meantime, we are seeing some of what you can call, they are calling them a Muslim Brotherhood subsidies, which is Muslim Brotherhood was here in ruling Egypt about 7 years ago, after before the military coup. So we have much of a repression of freedom of expression. We have lack of data about the COVID pandemic. The government is trying to block any data, any specific data about the reactions to the pandemic. Until today we didn't know the demographics of the pandemic. We didn't know where the most affected regions of the country. Now they are releasing this data. We see that there is a rural areas in Egypt are affected after Cairo and Giza, the most urban governorate in Egypt. There is a rural areas which was affected heavily by the virus. We have many problems regarding repression measures that government is taking right now to oppress those who criticize their plan to address the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have a continuation of oppression of what you can call the state security measures, as the State Security Council, or what you can like it's like a repression regime, a repression state organization have right now a big authority over the addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. So we are in a bad situation right now regarding repression measures. Okay.
Thank you, Mohamed. We'd actually like to, and this is also something that some of you have briefly mentioned, the economic side of this. Which part of the populations are the most impacted by COVID-19 in terms of infections by the virus and subsequent deaths, if there is data on that? I know that's also sometimes not possible to have. What is the economic impact for marginalized people? How are the authorities behaving towards these people in this context? How are they, or are they planning specific measures to support and look after the most vulnerable at the time? Are there any sort of social systems that are in place to support people at a time like this? We could maybe start with Rami for this one.
Okay. It's very important to know that when we're talking about the impact of the COVID for us as Palestinians, the most important sector of the Palestinians, they are the workers. The unemployment had increased recently because of the COVID, and especially for the Palestinians who are working inside Israel, because there was a closure. Palestinians were not able to leave their cities, and it was really good suffer. But also, it's very important to keep in mind that some cities were affected more than others, especially when we're talking about again, Bethlehem. Bethlehem itself, because they have noticed the epidemic at the beginning, so that there was closure. And actually 90% of the economy in Bethlehem depends on tourism. Israel has closed all of the borders, and also it was a good decision by the Palestinian Authority to close the city itself, and there will not be able, the tourists were evicted from the city, but this had left with 90% of the people, actually not percent of the economy, but almost 85% of the people, they were unemployed as a result of this. And again, when we're coming back about the second wave of the virus itself and within the other government, also we have noticed this. But if we want to compare what is the situation within the Eid era, we had a little bit change. The economic situation started a little bit to, let us say, to stop collapsing and started. And this was one of the reasons that the Palestinian Authority government, the Palestinian government, decided that they should put the lockdown aside and start back to have the normal life.
Thank you, Rami. Mohamed, maybe we can talk about Egypt in terms of this context. Mohamed, I think you're muted. We can't hear you.
Okay.
There you go.
So, as you mentioned early, there is a lack of data about which group of people have been hit hard by the COVID pandemic, but we can see indicators about the economic impact of the COVID pandemic on various groups here in Egypt. The nature of the Egyptian economy is considered very complex, as it composes a much larger informal sector. About 6% of the GDP is from informal sector, which affects the regulations of the work, the amount of money, the wages they get at the end of the month. Here in Egypt, we have about 10 to 30 million people that's considered daily workers or informal daily workers, which have been hit hard by the lockdown of the service sector here in Egypt. Much of them are working in tourism, which have been stopped because of the global flight ban that have been in order before the pandemic hit Egypt. Much of the workers in the tourism industry or the tourism is related to rural areas where they work also in agriculture sector. So the tourism wages is much help for agriculture sector here in Egypt. We witnessed a re-immigrating, or vice versa, immigrating from the Gulf countries, which have more about 8 million Egyptian workers, or 3 million Egyptian workers. Much of them have come back to Egypt as the pandemic hits the Gulf countries as well. We are looking right now about the government didn't respond very well to the economic challenge of the COVID pandemic. There have been an initiative by the government to give the daily workers about $30 or $35 a month for as a grant, but it's for 1 month. And it covers only 1.3 million people from the 30 million affected of the daily workers. So with regard to the high poverty rate in Egypt, about 1/3 of the population is under the poverty line. It's like an economic crisis that could lead to a starvation or what you can call a personal economic crisis here in Egypt to many families and many people. Okay.
Thank you, Mohamed. Now let's hear the similar question for maybe Salman.
Yes, Taha. This is, I think I mentioned about this point before, but I want to say also something about related with the economic in Iraq. We have with the modern economy, oil, how we export the oil. That's it. We don't have anything else to export it. So this is maybe many of the Arabian country, they said, oh, Iraq have an oil, so they are rich. No, this is before, not now. Now we don't have that much of money came from oil and the exporting of the oil, because now our economic is just dependent on the oil, and the oil after the coronavirus is go down the price of the oil. So now we have a big gap, and the crisis is making bigger and bigger with the time because of the COVID-19 and because of the economic system. And the Iraq government, they didn't have anything to to resolve it, to make solving for this crisis. Just like they work a lot last 2 months to find a way to solve it. They just find something they can pay, something like small grant, less than $100 for 3 months. Actually, this less than $100 for 3 months in Iraq, you just can't spend it in 1 week. They take it for the poor family for 3 months. No, they cannot, because they have rent for the house. They need for the food. They need many things to do it. They should to solve it, because they already cut in all the private worker also. Many of our worker here in Iraq is not employed, is private. So all the private workers and the shops, everything is locked down, is stopped. They cannot selling anything. So they just the employees, they can got this money, and that's why we have this gap of economic now here in Iraq. So this gap should be solving by the Iraq government, but they didn't do anything till now. Specifically, when we spoke about the poor families in the neighborhood, because those families, they will go out to and they will got the COVID-19. So this is actually we have two crises here in Iraq: the economic crisis, and the second one is related with the coronavirus. Thank you.
Thank you, Salman. Laith.
Yeah, so we were talking about the economic fallout and of the situation, and as you can see, Lebanon has had that demonstrations for 6 months that practically destroyed the economy, not because of the demonstrations, but because of the international conflagration that is putting so much pressure on the business and economic system of Lebanon. But once the lockdown was instituted, a lot of people are out of work. The Lebanese lira in just 8 months went from being worth 1,500 per $1 American. Today it's at 4,000 somewhat. So it has deflated by 3,000%, 300%, sorry, not 3,000%. So the money that was already in the economy, people who had any money in the banks, they basically lost 2/3 of the worth of what they are holding. And banks were already squeezing the population at the orders of the US, and were not allowing people to withdraw their money prior to COVID hitting. And some of these banks took advantage of the Corona situation and shut their ATMs and their office hours for weeks, until things got. I think they got some pressure from the new government that came into effect just at the end of the year. So in terms of looking at the areas that are affected, it was a surprise that Beirut wasn't most of the cases. In fact, the majority of the cases are outside Beirut, which is a big surprise. And the reason it ended up being like that is because of the religious sites, whether they're Christian or Muslim, and the monasteries and so forth that were coming back from Italy and or Iran, and that's where the cases of the big infections happened in little towns. They had to be controlled, and looking at beyond the fact that most of the Lebanese people are working in the service industries and tourism, You have a huge Sudanese, Ethiopian, and Bangladeshi population that is here as foreign workers. And they were all basically couldn't go back to their countries, and they saw their own incomes losing all their value. And that is if they were getting paid. So a few weeks ago, the mainly Bangladeshi working force of one of the major service and cleaning businesses here in Lebanon went on a strike because they were not being paid for months. And also they were being jammed into very tight living conditions and making them more susceptible to the possibility of getting sick with corona. And there was some worries about the Palestinian refugee camps because of the high density of those camps. But Palestinians being used to not having any services from the Lebanese government and having their own institutions within these refugee camps worked very hard to control any possibility of infections. So there's been, luckily, very low percentages of cases in Palestinian refugee camps, and that's mainly thanks to the Palestinian civil society. And this is, you could also say the same in general in Lebanon, again, because of the almost non-existent state apparatus. The religious and political party affiliations all started trying to outdo each other. It's almost like, usually they compete over their racism to each other, or now they were competing to who is gonna provide more services. So you had a lot of field hospitals and checking corona checkup points being set up by all the different sects and political parties across the country, all these aid services that were being provided. In Syria, the situation is much different, obviously, because there's right now zero international working force, but the division line is between areas that are under control of the Syrian government versus areas that are under control of either the terrorist groups in Idlib and or the direct American occupation in Hasaka and Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor in the northeast. And as far as the areas that are under the Syrian government control, and this is where most of the data or the actual evidence that we can see coming out, there was a big effort to deliver goods to during those few weeks, because Syria's curfew or shutdown didn't last very long. But during those few weeks that they had the shutdown, the Syrian government was providing the basics in a lot of locations. I would say, even just to one last thing before I let go of this, in Lebanon, electricity and water services coming from the state into people's houses are intermittent. So usually, sometimes in the summer specifically, you get a few hours of water coming from the city, and then the population usually buys water, gets delivered to their building. And we noticed that during the 10 weeks of the lockdown, actually the Lebanese government provided the maximum of water and electricity. I've never seen it this consistent and this much water and so much electricity being delivered to the houses. And I was, making jokes with friends about it, saying, well, they're doing it, because they don't want people to go out and for an excuse of, or have this extra thing to pay for during this pandemic. So I think that the Lebanese government did a really good job under the conditions of not existing even as a government.
Thank you, Laith. So just as a reminder for our listeners, prior to this pandemic, there were many social movements that were fighting against the powers in their countries, and we've been witnessing this since last year. We've been witnessing massive demonstrations in Iraq, massive demonstrations in Lebanon, and there was a lot of social movements for freeing political prisoners in Egypt, rights activists and journalists in Egypt as well. And obviously, in the context of Palestine, the resistance has been ongoing against the Israeli occupation for as long, time immemorial for now. So what is the situation in terms of those social movements that were happening before this? What were their demands before the pandemic? How are these demands made today, despite the pandemic? And let's start with Salman.
Yes, actually, the revolution, basically, the protests, they just want their rights. This isn't basically. But if we want to speak about their rights is a lot of points they needed. Because as you know, as I mentioned, there is more than 30 years with Saddam Hussein. There is dictatorship, and there is a corruption system also. And from these last also 17 years also most of corruption, all of these years is corrupted. All of things here in Iraq now is fake. So all the youngs decided this revolution is by the youngs. It's a protest, it's not demonstration. It's a protest and revolution. We need to change. And we have the alternative. Because in the last 10 years, the civil society worked a lot to make those youth people in a good mind and in a good way, in a good street to ask for their rights. Their rights is easy. Their rights is service. Their rights is work and employees. Their rights to support the private work in a good way. Their rights it's solving this big crisis we have here in Iraq, the capitalism. This is big crisis we have now in Iraq, the capitalism, and there is a huge gap between each families. We have a rich families, we have and also we have the government families, and we have the poor families. Why we don't have that before? So we should to go back, because we always catch and depended on our culture in Iraq, and our culture is related with the Sumerian time, it's thousands year ago. So we need our rights. That's why all those people go to the street. And after that, in the middle of February, not the organizer, because this revolution, there is no. The most important things for this revolution, there is no organizer for this revolution. The protest, just there is a tent, and there is for each tent there is a community, and the community for each tent they decided, and they decided all the tent together, and all the tents around the Iraq, the protest, they decided to postpone all the activities. All our protest was non-violence already, but there is a pushing from the parties, from the militia, and from the government also. We breathing gas tar, we breathing live fire. So everything we live with it in last 6 or last 8 months. All of it, we live with it. In all country, maybe they have only the government. Now in US, they have only the government pushing them with the gas star or with something like that. But here in Iraq, no. We have the government and we have the militia. And the militia is not to defend us for the government. No, for the others, from the neighbor, for a neighbor country. So there is a lot of things happen here in Iraq. So this revolution, we build it and we support it always to got our rights. That's it. This is basically what we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Salman. Let's hear from Rami.
Yes, just before getting about the social movement, one important issue that I don't know I have missed talking about the economic situation, that the Palestinian Authority itself, it's important to know that they have not any plans to compensate the different sectors that they were affected by the COVID-19. But what we have noticed, which was a good initiative by the PA, but it wasn't from the PA itself, it was from the Palestinian private sector, that they were obliged by the PA, by the government to do it. They allocated, I think, for 38,000 Palestinians workers that they become unemployed to be compensated with less than $200 for the 3 months that they were not able to go and work. This is important. About the social movements. Just to let you know that the social movements within the within the occupied Palestinian territories, just to let you know that it was affected directly, but to keep in mind that the Israeli authorities themselves did not stop their violation against us as Palestinians. When we are talking about that, the violation, Israeli occupying forces have demolished mosques. They also have confiscated poles, sheeting, and other materials that are used for mobile clinics to be used by the Palestinian organization in Area C in the West Bank, and for emergency housing units. And also, as I have mentioned, they have arrested the Palestinians whom are working and volunteering for this. And this kind of apartheid against Palestinians, it wasn't only the West Bank and Jerusalem, also it was inside the Green Light, in the Naqab area. We're talking about 80,000 Palestinian citizens, 80,000 Palestinian citizens have no access to emergency medical services. In addition, we are talking about 56 residents of villages that they are considered unrecognized villages at the Naqab area. They were have no adequate cases, access to safe or clean water within the epidemic itself. At the same time, Israel has failed to allocate resources for coronaviruses, testing and emergency medical services to those unrecognized villages inside 1948. It's important to keep in mind that coronavirus had shed the light on the detrimental impacts of Israel apartheid regime on the different rights of Palestinians, especially the health right. And I would like to end up with one of the cases that we have dealt with. He's a Palestinian, Mustafa Khawaja, that was killed at the beginning of the epidemic because of the closure. He and his friend left their village to another very adjacent village, and according to the Israeli narrative that they were trying, or they were accused of being there is an alleged attack against Israelis. Everybody in the village know that it wasn't an alleged. They were killed. He was killed by mistake by the Israeli authorities. Until now, we are at the end of May. Tomorrow is June. We are talking about 3 months, and the body of Mustafa al-Khawaja, Shahid Mustafa al-Khawaja, was not, it is still detained by the Israeli authorities. And this is one of the violations. So that how this is affecting the Palestinian social movement, I will be very transparent. Within the COVID-19 period, there was lost confrontation between the Palestinians, we as Palestinians, and the Israeli authorities. And unfortunately, even there was this kind of less confrontation, less conflict, Israeli apartheid regime continued violating our rights. hoping that concerning the Palestinian Authority itself, the Palestinian Authority, they were looking to have this kind of lockdown even at Al-Eid period, the 3 days. They were not able to because the Palestinians, we as Palestinians were like fully and they were ready for explosion. It started at the Dheisheh refugee camp. The Palestinian Authority tried to force the closure on the Palestinians the day before Eid, on Saturday, last Saturday, and there was clashes, and it was obvious for the Palestinian government that they cannot continue this lockdown, and the second and third day, they switch off the lockdown. Thank you.
Thanks, Rami. Laith, please.
Yeah, I mean, the movement here in Lebanon is very complex because, you know, the main factors in it are economic factors of, you know, people wanting their jobs, wanting better services. And because the government is non-existent and because the financial system is controlled by the United States directly, having the dollar being in the major actually currency that is used in Lebanon, and the 6 months before that of increased American sanctions and shutting down of banks by the United States and so forth. This is kind of the background of what instigated demonstrations that brought down the former government of Hariri. And, you know, at the end of that, those 6 months, it was clear, you know, that the new government that is formed by the winning coalition of Hezbollah and the Patriotic Party are finally going to have a government that is not hodgepodge. You know, prior to this new government coming in, every government in Lebanon has been just a national coalition government, meaning every party is responsible for the mess. And this is the first time that actually the winners of the election ever form government in Lebanon. So we've had none of those economic situations changed, but Corona came and brought people back to their homes because of the lockdown and the fear of the spreading of the disease. The government is moving slowly, you know, making moves that have never been done before, including saying that they will remove the Governor General of the central bank, who's appointed basically by the United States and has been in power since 1993. So he's been there longer than any prime minister ever. They just arrested the operations manager of the central bank of Lebanon, the government, a week ago. And because now they have proven that he, along with the black market money exchangers, were on purpose playing with the exchange rate of the lira. So the central bank was buying the lira from the black market smugglers, like money exchangers, in order to withdraw it from the market and therefore to crash the lira. So this was all, you know, this is how complicated the situation politically is in Lebanon, where things are not as easy as to explain with one color or another. And you could see the change will come slower than expected. And, you know, the pressures will continue from the populace because, you know, if the money is still this worthless and jobs are rarer, there will be probably some return to some form of demonstrations if the government doesn't move fast enough. And the pressures are either the government actually does something as fast as possible, which will trigger more American sanctions on the state, and or it does it slow enough, and then that will trigger more pressure from the street and the population. And so we'll see where that goes.
Great. Mohamed for Egypt. Mohamed, I don't think we can hear you. I don't know if it's just me. But...
Okay.
Okay, there you go.
You hear me now? Okay. Egypt is not a unique as it to social movements before the pandemic. There was a boiling anger against the government in 2019 after the corruption of the construction of the presidential palace, but the government soon crashed the government and cracked on the demonstrations early. So we witnessed from 2014 until now, after the coup of military coup in Egypt, we witnessed a brutal military dictatorship, which give no chance to social mobilization, to social movements to grow. We have more than 60,000 political prisoners here in Egypt, which is a difficult situation to work or to do anything regarding politics, especially with the military elite controlling the country. But the main reflections of the current pandemic that has put an effort or give a life to the doctors syndicate here in Egypt. The doctors syndicate is doing very well to oppose the government plan to fighting coronavirus disease or coronavirus pandemic right now. The doctor syndicate have already been what you can call a social movement in, for their demands in higher wages, on fixing the or reforming the healthcare sector, or stop privatizing the healthcare sector, or other demands from the doctor syndicate. But in the current pandemics, they have grown more powerful because of the it's like a technical problem that doctors is at the center of it, as you can call it. So this might be the only social movement right now we can build on, which is the syndicate. Other syndicates here in Egypt have tried some initiatives to protect their members from getting coronavirus diseases. They have put discounts for medical treatment for their members, but there is no big thing right now here in Egypt, as you can say, because of the brutal dictatorship that we live under. That's it.
Thank you. Now, for the last question that we have today, this is almost similar to the previous question that we asked. What forms of solidarity has been developed or put in place by the population in the context of the pandemic? So if there is like any sort of like measures that the population itself was taking to respond to this pandemic, that would be worth mentioning. And maybe we can start with Rami.
Okay, The issue of solidarity, I think in Jerusalem we had a very unique experience that we had through the Jerusalem Assembly Against the Coronavirus, which is a coalition that was formed specially in order to organize ourselves as Palestinians living in the city of Jerusalem against this epidemic. At the beginning, just again to let you know, we're talking about 82 organizations that they have different bodies, different political views, and also grassroots organization, networks, and social movements. And at the beginning, we as right now, as a Palestinian non-governmental organization, and we were thinking whether we are going to have to be part within this coalition, with this assembly. It was a little bit difficult question. And after discussions internally, we thought, okay, khalas, we should join this coalition in order to organize ourselves, because the Israeli authorities, they are not paying any attention and they are neglecting East Jerusalem, the occupied city of Jerusalem, and we should start. And also keep in mind that the Palestinian Authority itself is not being able to work inside Jerusalem, and for this reason we said that we should work together within this coalition. And I think it was a very successful story. Just to let you know that the coalition or the assembly itself was responsible for the only Palestinian quarantine facility in the city, because there were another one that was facilitated and administrated by the Israeli municipality, and it wasn't for us Palestinians as a good place to go or to encourage people to go there, so that we were able to have this facility and we were encouraging it. Right now, you know, I haven't mentioned right now, Palestinians in Jerusalem and in West Bank and Gaza also having the Tawjihi exams, the certificate. The Jerusalem Assembly Against Corona is doing working within the Tawjihi. Also, they are facilitating, cleaning and sterilizing all of the classrooms that they will have, or because it was supposed to be the responsibility of the Israeli occupation to do all of this, to keep it hygiene. And for the neglecting, we as Palestinians took the lead and we are working on this issue. This is a very small example. We work also with the Palestinian hospitals inside the city of Jerusalem. We were working on in order to support those hospitals. Just to let you know that we are talking about 3 major hospitals that they are supposed to work with the corona issues, and they hadn't any proper equipment. Through the assembly, we have networking with the international organization, the World Health Organization, in order to support them with the equipment that they are looking. I think this is the most important issue. Also in the Palestinian villages, there were like some local committees that they were working and also organizing themselves, spreading information and awareness, and also not letting people to leave, especially if a village that they have some people or a person or 2 persons that they were infected with the virus. It will be closed the village and not able to leave it. This also was an important tool that was by the Palestinian civil society. Thank you.
Laith.
So, as I mentioned before, the majority of the work to kind of mitigate the results of pandemic socially was done by the civil society, religious organizations, and political parties. The government has put in a huge budget for the health sector. Given the problems that the Lebanon has, it was an achievement. But more importantly, organizations like Hezbollah built, specifically Hezbollah built 12 field hospitals across the country, even in Christian areas and Sunni areas and Shia areas, and mobilized openly its medical corps of its fighting force, around 6,000 medics and doctors that are part of the Hezbollah fighting force medical corps, and they were deployed around the country. So this is just talking about Hezbollah, and you can, obviously think about all the competitors to Hezbollah who wanted to also look good and responsive to the population and did the same. Maybe not as big as and as powerful of symbols that Hezbollah did. In many neighborhoods, there was food exchange, and Ramadan arrived in the middle of the pandemic, and people are generous in Ramadan. So although the hospitals were, the mosques were closed during the pandemic, during Ramadan, people couldn't go pray. But the mosques, including the one right beside my house right here, were handing out everyday meals, a couple of hours before the iftar time, the breaking the fast time. The mosque had, and this is a more wealthy area, so you can think about even the poorer areas. That was happening everywhere. And so there was food distributions directly to the population throughout Ramadan. And right now, things are starting to get back. Work is, in most offices, is open, and most businesses. We still have curfew at night, starting 6 p.m. All of the businesses must be closed. So, it is kind of phase one of getting out of the full lockdown right now in Lebanon. And I think, Arab societies in general are, because of the strong social networks and family and networks that are there, and religious networks, we have been mostly saved from from the majority of the pandemic. Egypt, unfortunately, has had a really horrible situation with the government refusing to lock down, and it's mostly obviously very clear that they are caring more about the economic situation, and they have not much of a maneuver avenue, because it's 100 million, it's the bulk of the Arab population in the world, Egypt, and I look at Lebanon and I feel we were very lucky for there hasn't been much more cases, and kind of people are immune to poverty almost. Here, people can grow their stuff everywhere, not around only the Nile, like in the situation of Egypt. So people just eat their own food that they grow in the backyard and in the balcony.
Thank you, Laith. We'll hear next from Salman in terms of Iraq, and then Mohamed in terms of Egypt, and then we do have some questions that have popped out. So afterwards, we will also ask these questions. So Salman?
Yes, for Iraq, I'm so proud for the Iraqi civilian and what's happened for the last month till now. It's starting with the revolution. This social solidarity and social support. It's start with the protest, because in the protest and the tent in the street they need to this solidarity. And after that, it's continue with the COVID-19, because as you know, in Iraq we have a good experience with the crisis, because we have war from the 30 years ago, outside and inside war also. So we have a good experience with the with this kind of solidarity. And also last 10 years we work a lot also with the civil society to the idea of the solidarity and how we can increasing this noble criteria with the people. So after that we should to know there is more than 60% percentage from the population in Iraq they need for the support because of the economic issue and what we spoke about it. And also the second thing, we need the public the good public health system, because the health system, it should be public here in Iraq, because we don't have that much of good families. They can go to the private hospitals. So this is we have a problem with this issue. And as I mentioned before, the capitalism and how they control everything here in Iraq, this is also not good point. And let's go back to the solidarity. Yeah, and as I mentioned, it's continue from the revolution. After that, continue with the COVID crisis. And what's happened with that? There is thousands of the volunteers. They go to the street, and they go to the donors. Also, there is a huge market, and there is rich families. They went to them to collect the money and sell and buying stuff and dividing this for the poor families. And also in Ramadan they do that with the clothes, because summer is coming and the poor families, they cannot change their clothes, and they work with that. Also they have a lot of solidarity forms, a lot of kind of solidarity here in Iraq. Many things in many way. No one from the government can do anything, but the civilian can do this solidarity, and they win in the end. But as I mentioned, they don't have that much of energy to continue, because of the coronavirus. Maybe stay with us till the next year. So now the Iraq government should to work with themselves to make a solution. Thank you.
Thanks, Salman. Mohamed. We can't hear you, Mohamed.
Like every time. Okay. So here in Egypt, we have a complex situation, or as is mentioned, a lack of maneuverability for the government to deal with such a crisis in such a big country like Egypt. But as we didn't expect here in Egypt, we saw much of solidarity and social initiative that was a much help for the combat against the current pandemic. Some doctors organized online hospital for consulting with the isolated cases at homes for treatment, as the healthcare system is overwhelmed by COVID-19 pandemic cases. Some doctors have provided free healthcare for the poor people in some areas. We witnessed solidarity. We witnessed solidarity in rural areas, especially in villages, where the population they have conducted the cleansing or disinfecting process for the streets, for the homes, as a cooperative work between all of them. We have witnessed charity growth because of the pandemic and because of Ramadan, which is a seasonal part of the year where many Muslims pay their zakah, or pay their sadaqah for the poor. Much of the solidarity comes from the civil society organizations, especially in development sectors that is big here in Egypt, especially in the rural areas. Here in Egypt, we have the informal economy that works as a backup for many of the population, especially in the agriculture sector. We have a big agriculture sector, so the people really didn't have much of a crisis in food or food supplies here in Egypt. There is much of the solidarity we didn't expect in such a pandemic or such a crisis as I mentioned. But this solidarity is not enough. We look forward to see the government trying to do anything right in dealing with this pandemic. So what you could say is that we see solidarity, but didn't see the government doing too much. Okay.
Thank you, Mohamed. Now we'll move to the second part of our panel. And the last part, we have two questions here. So I will read out the questions. The first question we have from our brother, Abdurrahman Ahmed. He is asking, in line of the recent courageous act of solidarity from Iran to Venezuela, do you think that it's time for the different social movements in the global south to start rebuilding more concrete solidarities between themselves, such as an extension of the axis of resistance? If any of you would like to address the question, that would be good.
Okay, I could start. It's a global pandemic, as you say. It demands a global response to the current socio-economic conditions that the pandemic have created in the global south and the north, of course, that have been a hit to the economy and the marginalized people in the US, in Italy, in Spain, and much of the modern world, of course. But in the global south, we have complex problems that is prior to the pandemic, especially the status of the healthcare system and the global, which is declining over time, which is doesn't have the minimum quality for providing healthcare to any kind of doesn't have the capacity to provide the healthcare in the regular times. You can imagine in the pandemic what will happen to that healthcare system, especially in the big countries like Egypt, like Iran, like many other poor countries that have bigger population. The question of solidarity or between organizations or social movements and the global south is a very complex question. I think it's related to many other issues other than the pandemic. Like you can say it's related to public debt. Lebanon, Egypt, and many other countries in the global south have a public debt crisis. Here in Egypt, we have done a little about. We have done a little organizing with other organizations that works on the global debt or global public debt. You can call it. It's difficult. It's difficult to think in the current situation that will lead to a major change in social movements, I think, from my point of view. It will create a crisis, but I think it will be our capitalism, or what you can call the neoliberal policies, will surely adapt with this crisis. يعني it's difficult. It's difficult to answer such a question in the time. But يعني, as they say, change is a slow process. We can build now. We can work for organizing, for communication with other organizations on that issues, and we can see the change on years from now.
Thanks, Mohamed. Is anyone else, would anyone else also want to address the same question on the issue of, like, is it time for different social movements in the Global South to start rebuilding more concrete solidarities between each other?
Yeah, I would say that in the Arabic world, the main thing that has been missing in all the, let's say, movements that came after 2010 has been actually providing any vision for something that is outside the colonial frameworks. So in the 60s and 50s and 70s in the Arabic world, we had the Arab liberation, Arab unionism movement, you know, wrought with people like Jamal Abdel Nasser and the liberation movement in Algeria and Syria and others that we've saw. And this gave an impetus for people to actually envision solutions outside the frameworks that were imposed on us within the colonial international imperialist formula. So currently, if we look at what happens here, let's say in Lebanon as an example. So Lebanon, well, what is it? It is a city-state around the city of Beirut, a city of 1.5 million, a population that is actually Lebanese citizens are 4 million. There's another 2 million Palestinians and Iraqis, and Syrians, and another 500,000 of foreign workers. So Lebanon doesn't have the resources to actually be independent and sovereign on its own in this contextualized. It's a small piece of land, very small population. Forever, it will be under the influence of somebody who is bigger than it, and most probably that is not that is from outside our region. So what does this mean? That means that no matter what people try, Lebanese protesters, demonstrators, civil liberties organizations, in the end, there's the check that's going to come out of the reality of the colonial rule and the system that we live in globally. And therefore, the only way for Lebanon to escape that mechanisms and to provide the necessary services to its citizens and give them a bright future is to envision unifying with at least the greater Syria region, if not the rest of the Arabic world. Similarly, when we talk about Egypt, Egypt is the heart of the Arabic world. But Egypt without Al-Sham doesn't have wings to fly. Similarly, we talk about Iraq or Sudan or anything. Those are fractions of a nation, of a civilization. And no matter what we try to talk about civil liberties, democracy, this or that, Americans don't even have those things that we are labeling. We can see right now what the American army is doing to its population. And, there's none of this democracy and civil liberties anywhere in the West. We can see how the BDS is being criminalized anywhere in Europe. So where do we start? We have to change our language. All these civil movements have to cease to talking about these colonial borders and envision our liberation collectively and put a plan like the days of a generation that passed, that tried and failed, but maybe now is the time to bring those things back. And we are at the moment that a new generation is out. There's a lot of energy and life in this. Before they snuffed out this life by failing in achieving anything because we limit ourselves within these colonial borders and possibilities. We need to re-envision Arab unionism, Arab republicanism, Arab Unitarian thought, and bring these countries back together.
Very great, great input, Laith. Thank you so much for that. I think Salman also, you wanted to address this question, right? And Rami as well?
Yes, yeah, if you allow me, I'm totally agree what Mr. Laith said. Totally agree with him, because this is the idea to save our future, not to save the future for us, to save the future for our children. Because this is what should we live. The solidarity is a kind of the humanity giving. So we should to do that. The solidarity, it should be between all the civilian around the world. We never mention the solidarity between the government, because always the solidarity between the government is depending on the economic issue and something related with the war or something like that. No, we always support the solidarity between the civilian. That's what's happened with Iraq when we have a crisis before, when we have a war before. There is many countries make a solidarity with us. There is many civilians go to the street and support a solidarity with Iraq. And actually in Iraq we have a good experience with the solidarity, because we already work with the ICSSI, Iraqi Civil Society Solidarity Initiative, and we work a lot to collect all the solidarity from initiative from around the world to bring it to the Iraq, to the civil society in Iraq and all the civil society around the world. This is what we work on it.
Exactly as Salman just mentioned. Really, I couldn't understand when we were talking about solidarity and what had happened between Iran and Venezuela. It is something like really a regime that is supporting other regime, an Islamic regime that is supporting a socialist regime, that both of are against imperialism, and we do agree about this. But I wouldn't agree on understanding or that the solidarity is between two governments. No, the solidarity should be by, as Salman mentioned, from people to people, from civil society to civil society, and not through governments, because there is an interest, really. If we are looking about what's happening within Iran and between Iran and Venezuela, they have a common interest that they would like to support, and they have sent this. But can we define this as solidarity that we are looking for as really as depressed people? I think the question itself, it should be refurnished. Thank you.
Okay, we have one last question here from Saliban Abdullahi Jama, and they said Arab countries always talk about Arab solidarity, in brackets Arab League. Did the rich Arab, or are the rich Arab Gulf monarchies helping their Arab brother countries? Here in Somalia, a member of the Arab League, we didn't get any help. What about your countries?
Okay, really the Gulf state, I consider a big obstacle to the development of the Arab world. They have long been support to the dictatorship and other Arab countries. They have been financing coups in other countries. They are being cleansing the patterns of work or the patterns of development in the other Arab countries. They use the extra workforce in countries like Egypt, in countries like Syria, I think for some time, Jordan or Iraq, for financing the or working in the Gulf states for the petrodollar money, for the what you can call the rent of the oil that have been created or accumulated, contributed to the accumulation of capital and investments in the Gulf region. I think the Gulf state is a manifestation of what you can call a Gramscian view of the Arab world. The Arab world, if we can use Gramsci right now in the Arab context, we can say that the Arab world, the old Arab world is dying, and the new Arab world is struggling to born. And this is the time for monsters to appear, and the monsters in the Arab world are the Gulf states, especially Saudi Arabia, Emirates. Emirates have a major role in every coup that has been organized in the last 10 or 20 years in the Arab states. They have been a major role in supporting dictatorship from Gaddafi, from right now Haftar in Libya, from Omar al-Bashir in Sudan, Mubarak in Egypt. Right now, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in Egypt is continuing its brutal dictatorship with the support of the Gulf state countries. The Gulf state government is a big obstacle towards that solidarity we can work for. And this is a big dilemma about the Arab world. There is a rich state, there is poor states, there is an extra workforce in states that go to the Gulf state, that's creating a lack of professionalism in the other states, like in Egypt. When we talk, like Masan, when you talk about the success story about of Saudi Arabia in combating the pandemic, we didn't see that the majority of doctors in Saudi Arabia are Egyptian doctors. We here have a lack of doctors. They travel to the Gulf state for higher wages. They are contributing right now to the success story of Saudi Arabia in combating the pandemic. And here we are suffering the reflections of that inequalities that have been between the Arab region and within the Arab region.
Thank you, Mohammed. Anybody else would like to address this question?
I want to say, obviously, the Arab League is is a disappointment for all the Arab peoples, and it has been a hostage to Saudi Arabia for a long time. And no, there has not been any aid delivered to any Arabic state from the Gulf countries. And I actually, feel for my Somali brothers who have been living under 30 years right now of imposed Wahhabi civil war on them. They were the first experiment of what led what we saw happen in Syria and Iraq, the Wahhabi-Contra wars run by the Saudis and the Americans behind them. And you know, if you look at the Gulf countries, they have been the bulwark of imperialism in the Arabic work. We can go back and listen to Jamal Abdel Nasser and his amazing speeches about the Gulf leadership. And well, you know, from those days, they were plotting against any unification of the Arab people and their countries, and any development. And it's very sad, really, because you know, you saw what happened to the oil prices a few months ago when it was selling at -$40. And if you think about it, that was a purposeful thing done by the Saudi leadership under probably orders from Trump and the United States, who wanted free oil. It wasn't enough that they were stealing all the oil of Iraq, of Syria, of Libya, of Yemen, and smuggling it all out into the black market. They needed even the price to crash even more to save their economy, and obligingly, the Saudis flooded the market and you know, filled the coffers of white man. You know, so I feel, you know, sometimes when we call these countries rich, I feel bad, because actually 90% probably of all the wealth of the Gulf, the last 100 years of oil, have all ended up in American and British banks. And the people of the Gulf, the majority of them, don't see that money. You know, the colonial masters give enough money for the Gulf rulers to have their debauchery and flaunting of wealth, but not enough to even you know, uplift, you know, the 30 million Saudis that the majority of them are unemployed. I lived in Saudi Arabia for 12 years, from 1980 till 92, till right after the first Gulf War. And I can tell you, I lived with very impoverished Arabians. I don't even call them Saudis, because imagine calling a people by the name of the ruling family. Imagine if we call the British the Windsorians instead of calling them English. I think it's a humiliation to call the proud Arab people of Najd and Hijaz and Qasim to call them Saudis. So no, the Gulf countries unfortunately have been a cancer on us as Arab, as peoples. The Gulf ruling elite, just like the Zionist in the heart of Palestine. Those two things have shackled the Arab peoples for 100 years now. And the British occupation is not only a British occupation of Palestine, of Jerusalem, and controlling the Muslim and Christian narrative that comes out of Palestine, but is also an occupation of Mecca and Medina. The religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have been colonized by the British since the end of World War I, and the narrative of those religions has been, you know, dictated by our imperialist masters. And our liberation will come when we think of how we can liberate both Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem from these imperial tools.
Thank you very much. Laith. Rami, did you want to address this question as well?
No, just again, it is a kind of interest. Unfortunately, the Gulf Arab countries, if they have interest in a place, they will be putting their invests there. Unfortunately, what had happened in Syria, what is happening and still happened in Yemen and still happening in Libya, and that we can see that even the different parties or different countries in the Gulf countries, they have also different interests, so that each one is feeding the one that they supported. Totally agree with Laith. it's really a disaster when we see that those kind of monarchies are supporting Arab people to kill Arab people. I liked what he mentioned about that Somalia was the first experiment of the Wahhabis. This is really unfortunately what's happening for us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Salman, did you want to add anything to that?
Actually, my colleague, they spoke about everything. I'm totally agree what they said about what Mohammed said and what Laith said, what Rami said also. Unfortunately, the Arab Gulf, there is a huge problem with them. I don't know why they think like that, because when we see the Saudi Arabia, they didn't support any civil society in an Arab country, but they sent the money for the USID, and USID send it again to the civil society or to for the like grant for the organization. So why you do that? And there is a huge issue of the racist. Yeah, this is between the rich and the poor families, and there is a lot of issue with the Gulf country. Maybe before Iraq was one of the Gulf country, but not anymore. Till now, we are out of Gulf country now. Yes.
Thank you, Salman. We actually have one last question from Saliban Abdullahi Jama. He said, or she said, I'm not sure, as Arab youth, how could we avoid these present problems in the future as we are the future?
It's a difficult question. I don't know what we can do right now. As we have mentioned, I think the current status in the Arab world is that the old is dying and the new can be born. We are in a transitional period here in the Arab world. The political economy of the Arab world is changing really fast. The oil boom has ended, so the financing of the regional power of the Gulf state, I think it's going to diminish at the end, because they have a big liquidity problem, a big political, economic, or socio-economic problem that is shaking the Saudi, the Emirati, the other Gulf state societies really hard. This could lead to a change in the regional power here, but it's also for the local countries, or for the in the countries. We have witnessed a growing social movement in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Sudan, and other countries, in Algeria, of course. But this social movement, or this demonstrations, or struggles to address the current problems, which included poverty, inequality, and other problems, have stagnated, or have a stagnation right now under the authoritarian regimes, under the push from the authoritarian regimes to this group of people to be violent, so they can oppress them really easy. We see that the current socio-economic problems in the Arab have created ISIS, which have led to a terrorism problem here in Egypt and other countries in Syria. This is due to a socio-economic problem that the government have been creating for the last 4 or 5 decades after the end of the post-colonial states, and experiment all the developmental approaches that the Arab unionism, like what Laith said about Gamal Abdel Nasser or others, have adopted in the 60s and the 50s. Democracy is a huge demand here in the Arab world. We seen the Arab Spring in 2011, and after democracy and freedom was a huge demand in these demonstrations. Economic inequalities have been growing and put in the center of the demonstrations in Lebanon. Lebanon particularly during the socio-economic conditions that the banks have created in Lebanon. Here in Egypt, we are witnessing more boiling social movements with poverty increases, with the neoliberal transitions that Sisi has put in place with the support of the IMF and other international institutions. We have seen much of these boiling social movements got to an end by the authoritarian regime, but much are born again. I don't know what we can do. It's a difficult question, and it's a long question that we need to address in the context of change, not before the change. These questions of what can we do, what is the alternative, are developed during the change, not prior to the change, I think. But we hope the best for all. We hope liberating for our countries, for our Arab countries, for our Arab communities here in the region. We hope we get safe through the COVID pandemic, and we can work on our solidarity or our social movements to address the current and the long-standing problems of the Arab world.
Maybe if I can chime in a little bit, I have a view that the solutions are very simple. I know maybe a lot of us have gone through a lot of these cyclical movements. There's some frustration or there is some depression about it. But I want to take you back to the moments of 2011 of Tahrir Square or the days on Tunis. And if we can look back for a second and kind of have a critique to it. What went wrong beyond obviously the Gulf countries pouring their money and the West controlling the outcome of it in the end. I think part of where we have a problem is that we're not dreaming big enough. Okay, so even the Wahhabi Contras, the death squads, are dreaming bigger when they want to create an Islamic state from this, from one end of the world to another, and at the sword, and they go for it. I mean, we have, our culture, we have our bonds. We know that none of our countries are complete. We don't have, one country has oil resources but doesn't have the working force. Another country has the working force but doesn't have the food. And the third one has this. It's very simple, the solution. I was feeling very sad when I was watching the Sudanese demonstrations last year and the Algerian demonstrations, and with nobody, not even one person in the street or the leaderships of any movement or parties ever daring to say unification of the Arab world, okay? And what that means is that if we are dreaming within our borders right now, And you already know inside a country like Egypt or Iraq or Sudan, the power structures and centers of power have been consolidated for 50, 60 years. Those elite who rule Egypt are the same elite after the death of Nasser and the compromise that they did with the Americans. Similarly, when we talk about any other state, it's the same elite structures and have been consolidated every position of power within the society. So you dreaming to, and you meaning me and all of you, dreaming for liberation within those limited frameworks is a failed project. Therefore, you have to change the playing field. And the most logical thing is that we speak in this minimum of Arab unification. If you know, so and you can see I'm purposefully not using the word nationalism. I'm using this Arab unification, and that is the least we can. If we can't put that as our first demand, everything else is a losing case, because how are you going to fight for the positions of power within your society? You're going to ask for support from outside it. We saw what happened when those in other countries, in other Arabic countries, got the support from outside their country. What ended up happening, we ended up having death squads and killing fields and rape factories. And so, we have to dream and give hope, and that only hope to us is Arab unification.
Thank you. Rami or Salman, would anyone like to chime in as well?
I think, to tell you the truth, that this is really an ambitious question. And maybe it will not be easy to answer it within the end of webinar, and I think maybe we need sessions and sessions in order to answer this question properly. If we are looking forward, yes, the change should be done. The youth should take the lead, and hoping that they will be able to take it and to make it without any external intervention. I think right now we are for Arab, let us say, young men from different countries, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and here in Palestine. And I think that all of us, the four of us, we are agreeing in some issues, but some other issues, we do not agree on it. And this is really something really difficult. And maybe it will not be applicable to cover it within the discussion right now. Unfortunately, it is a very, very ambitious question. Thank you.
Salman, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, small thing. It's just I just want to say, just like what Rami say, it should be to do a session about this question, because we have a lot of idea, I think, with my colleague to spoke about it, how we can avoid this crisis, this present what we have now. But basically, we can do it in our dream. In our dream, we should dream about it, and absolutely will come in. Another word is coming, and another word is possible. It's came another word, and the revolution and what's happened for last few years and next few years will happen also. We will destroy all the capitalism. We will destroy all the racist and everything, and after that we can imagine how we can build this world again with solidarity, for sure. This is what I can say till now. Thank you.
Thank you, Salman. And with that, we end our panel discussion today about the Middle East facing COVID-19. This is a conversation that's a part of a discussion series titled Direction Sud, Conscience Non Confinée, and it's organized by Convergence, the luttes, Sud, in collaboration with Alternatives. Thank you so much for all who were asking questions and tuned in. And also, of course, very big thanks to all the panelists today, Mohamed, Rami, Salman, Laith. Thank you very much for your very valuable input. And of course, big thanks to Safa behind the scenes for organizing this. I hope you all have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Solidarity.
Salam.
Thanks.
Salam.
Thanks for hosting. Okay, bye.